UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jenn Durrell.
Well, hey, baby.
Oh, hey, baby.
How's it rocking in the great state of Missouri tonight?
It's rocking pretty good.
That's good. You were back at your job at the haunted location. I think you have some stories for us tonight, right?
I might have a few, a little.
Why don't we save them, though, for while we have our two guests on? I'm so excited to be talking to. They have an up-and-coming podcast called FOLKLORE Dark, and that will be exploring history, mystery, and magic weekly by way of recorded tales and interviews with more obscure guests. One of the hosts, Melissa, has worked on several podcasts in the past, including the Folklore podcast and The Secret Door. I was lucky enough to be on one of Melissa's shows, actually. It was a great interview, a great time. And Letcia works in holistic healing and has spent her life immersed in the occult and esoteric arts. Both will be exploring, with a variety of guests and artists, the folklore that lies in the darkness of us. So I'm delighted to welcome to the show Melissa Martell and Letcia Martinez, sorry. Greetings, Letcia Martinez. I'm sorry, I botched your name.
No worries.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, good evening, everybody, and thanks for having us on the show, Jenn and Dean.
Oh, it's great to have you. I've been following your podcasts for quite some time, Melissa. They're always everything I've ever seen you do is fantastic. But this is probably the one that I'm most excited about. I love the artwork. I love the title, Folklore Dark. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of direction you guys are planning on going in? And, you know, I talked a little bit about it in the intro, but I'm sure you can give us a better idea.
Well, I'm really excited about this one, too, because I get to do this partly with Letcia. So in my perspective, I mean, I grew up in an old city surrounded by a lot of Irish folklore and tales and lived in a haunted house. So this is this kind of chance to mix this with this kind of mod hammer horror feel, 70s look and tales, and sort of create some kind of artsy projects where we pre-record obscure tales and folklore tales, but also have lesser known guests on, authors, young and up and coming people who are trying to, you know, get their work out there. And just, I don't know, Letcia probably has some other ideas in the arts, but it's getting this content out there, whether it's pre-recorded or us recording tales, you know, doing poetic stuff and just having something that's really meaningful. It's not just about stories. It's also about heritage and folklore and how we connect to everything, you know, from the past right up to the present. And Letcia can add to that.
Yeah, I grew up reading a lot of different types of mythology, studying mythology, and also I have a very, very strong interest in folk tales and oral traditions. And having spent time in New Orleans about 15 years ago, these old guys told me these stories about the catfish eating children, and I didn't believe them. Like, oh, these are just old guys telling tall tales. And then years later, I read this newspaper story of this little boy that was cut out of a giant catfish's gut because he fell into the river and the catfish just scooped him up. So that was true. It was really true. And, you know, over the pandemic, I did a lot of reading and also exploring just occult tales and folk tales, moral tales of different cultures, and getting into some from the Philippines. They've got an amazing oral tradition of crazy cryptids and different types of paranormal experiences. And right now, you know, I'm getting into a lot of different Slavic horror and dark occult authors, and reaching out to them, possibly to coming on the show to talk about their traditions and their folkloric stories. And I'd like to just focus on other things just besides just the normal Western occult stuff, but there's other occult practices and beliefs around the world, and I'd like to explore those.
I find that so fascinating that you're talking about Slavic, because that's part of my
Yes.
history, half of it that I don't know, because I grew up with a stepfather and not my Slavic father, so I'm stoked about that.
Yeah,
because it's a part of me that I don't know about.
Yeah, there's a lot of great authors. A lot of them are women authors because they're carrying the tradition of their Baba's stories that they told them around the fire and around the kitchen table, and it's great.
I think it's a wonderful idea. Folklore, in some ways, is very popular again. We have this resurgence in folk horror movies and the like, but at the same time, there's always this sense that we're losing a lot of the folklore, a lot of the folklore traditions. I know people, much the way the Grimm brothers collected folk tales way back in the 18th century or whenever they were operating, or was it the 19th, whenever. But people like Eddie Lenahan, for example, in Ireland today, is very conscious that these fairy type tales and Irish legends are disappearing as the older generation is passing. So he does his best to collect them and preserve them. Is that something you guys are conscious of doing as well, preserving these stories?
And I think for me, one of the reasons I said folklore dark is because a lot of these old tales are watered down now to be way kinder and softer. It's not that I want to scare anyone to death, but they had a reason. They had a societal, like cultural reason to be told. And I think we should not make it grotesque, but kind of, keep this darker element that's almost like a lesson and in folklore. I don't think we should water it down and make, like a Tinkerbell version of it.
I couldn't agree with you more. One of the things that annoys me about the way fairies are portrayed today, as you mentioned, Tinkerbell, is that there's no commonality with the older traditions. Like if you listen to genuine tales from Ireland, they're not these tiny diminutive little things with wings that are granting wishes, although perhaps they can grant wishes, and they can perhaps be little, or they can be tall, or they can be more often than not our size or slightly smaller. But Disney and other children's books and children's stories have done an awful lot, I think, in the last 100 years to tear out the guts of those traditions. When I homeschool my daughter, so I have a set curriculum designed by an organization, and I also add to it my own things, which I think are important. And a lot of that is literary and historical, because I'm a historian, I'm interested in literature. But one of the things I make sure we read are the fairy tales from the Brothers Grimm or Hans Christian Andersen and the original versions, not the tamed down versions. And people sometimes look at me and go, "Oh my goodness, would you really read your child that?" And I'm like, that's what children were read 100 plus years ago, before everything was sanitized. That was the cultural stories. And you're right. I think when you pull out the darker elements, they lose that potency, and they lose sometimes not always a traditional morality, but the idea that there's consequences to actions and the world is dangerous.
And I mean, I don't think you should scare the life out of your kids or go too crazy, but there's some kind of element where, like, I read an article once, and I don't have the link or anything, but it's suggesting that people who watch horror movies, even when they're younger, you think they'd be horrible, but it's actually helps them cope with things better. I don't know if you've read about that, but there's some psychology between people who enjoy horror movies being able to deal with real life better.
I think so too. I think so too. I think that's true because, my dad would let us, on Friday or Saturday night, stay up to watch Night Gallery and Outer Limits and Twilight Zone and, Bela Lugosi movies and stuff. And I didn't have nightmares. I totally dug this stuff. And most kids weren't allowed to watch horror because they would have nightmares for weeks. But I was like, I'd go to bed and I'd continue the story in my head. So and there's parents that are really weird. I love Roald Dahl, and he's kind of touches creepy, wicked kind of folk horror tales based on a lot of weird British newspaper stories. And I gave one of my friends for her baby shower Roald Dahl book, and she absolutely refuses to read it to her kids now that they're older, or let them look at the book. It's like a hidden book.
That's bizarre, Letticia.
She thought it was creepy because it's illustrated with these really beautiful pictures of like paper cutouts that were like collaged and pasted together, and she's the book scares her. It's like, how can you be scared of James and the Giant Peach?
My teacher read that story to us in grade 2 and 3. Like, come on, it's amazing.
Yeah, I think children enjoy those darker tales. And I think they're less likely to be scared of things later in life. There's something, I remember when I was a child, I was absolutely fascinated with even darker things than I'd let my daughter, to be honest, experience. I was fascinated with UFOs and ghosts and Bigfoot, and hence, why I do what I do today. And sometimes those things were a little creepy, but there's something about that childhood imagination that to think the world is richer than just automobiles and traffic and city blocks and the humdrum of reality. It's healthy for the imagination to have this world filled with wonder and danger, I think.
It also reminds us of our very humanness and human beingness and where we actually come from. Maybe thousands of years ago, but we didn't always live in this safe and comfy tech world, and it's I don't know, there's always the possibility that you could find yourself there once again. Maybe I'm not trying to predict the downfall of society, but there's there's something to be said for we just don't respect the planet in the way that they used to, because they were directly affected in a way that we're not today.
And I love that retro throwback feel with the Folklore Dark artwork as well, by the way. Like, it makes me think of my youth. It makes me think of, Letticia and I were talking before about Hammer films and about those older folkloric traditions. So is that something kind of intentional in the way you want to present it, more of that 60s, 70s kind of feel?
It was definitely intentional, because I wanted to draw from that. But I mean, it can go different ways. And, at first I was doing it in a very different style. And I thought, this is boring. This is dull. There's nothing here. And then I was like, well, what do we want to say? And we had a discussion about it. And I was like, okay, I think I can do that. I think I can draw some of those elements, but because I didn't have that direction before. And once we had a discussion about it and we went in that direction, and then Matthew Lee Embleton recorded his sonnet for us, I was like, okay, now I know where it's going. So it just took a mash of ideas.
Oh no, it's great. I think. Tell me about the sonnet and some of those kind of. We were talking about that before the show as well.
Well, he wrote a sonnet as an introductory. I can see if I can find it, but he wrote a sonnet about an introductory to the and it went. I can read it to you guys now, but it won't sound as good as his English accent. I apologize. But it says, "What intrigue lies beyond the sunlight's spell, where soul and mind in counterbalance dwell? Accounts and stories speak of stranger things that warn us all of what the unknown brings. Though through centuries their magic did unfold in countless manuscripts and books of old. And as the listeners hear the story's arc, their tales are gathered here in Folklore Dark."
Oh, wonderful.
Oh, that's good.
I know.
It's super.
I didn't write that. Matthew Lee Embleton did. So he's our intro narrator. It's like he's introducing a TV show.
In fact, in some ways, it reminds me if there was a Folklore Dark in the 1970s, that might have been the introduction for it.
I know. He clued right into it as soon as I showed him the stuff and said what we were doing. It was great. Now I just have to line up the music with it, and that'll be our intro. And his voice, it's English accent, so I thought, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about, I know and it's wonderful you're doing all kinds of cultures, as you were mentioning before, Letticia, but there is something about the British Isles. Perhaps it's because that's where I am from background-wise, but the tales of the fair folk, or the tales of the other crowd, or for some reason the folklore and the mythology of that part of the world always kind of really resonates with me anyway. So I'm glad you have a British accent reading your introduction.
Yes, we were very, very lucky and fortunate. I want to give a big shout out to Matthew Lee Embleton. He's a musician. He has a YouTube channel, so we're very grateful that he, did that for us. And really, I didn't really expect that. So,
Yeah,
thank
it's
you,
beautiful.
Matthew.
What are your guys' favorite? If you had one favorite folklore tale, or if you had one favorite type of folklore, I'm going to ask you both. I'll ask you first, Melissa. Is there a folklore typology, or is there a folklore tale that really resonates for you?
There's so many of them, and I like so many of them. But my mom used to told me this story when I was a little girl, and there's variations of it, and it is about this sort of man and his wife, and she has this sort of golden. Sometimes it's a statue, sometimes it's an arm. Sometimes it's it's made of gold, and she treasures it, and she wants to be buried with it. And then it comes the day, years later, she dies, and the husband gets a little greedy, and he doesn't bury her with it. He just buries her. And there's this tale of he keeps it and all the money or whatever. And there's variations of this tale in whole different forms, but it scared me when I was like 5 so bad that I couldn't sleep, because she started saying, like, one night he goes to bed and he's sleeping, and he's all of a sudden he hears this, "I want my golden arm," really faintly, and then it gets closer and louder, and she's telling me, and I'm getting scared, and all of a sudden she goes, "Ebba!" And I jump out of my seat, and I'm like, "Oh my God!" I couldn't sleep for a week after she told me that tale. But there's variations of that story, whether it's, I want my liver, or somebody cooked the liver up, or had a something. There's so many variations, and I believe Night Gallery did a variation of that. It showed the guy coming out of the grave, and the painting would change, and he would walk up to the house. There's so many variations of that story, but it always spooked me right out when I was little.
Sometimes there'll be that specific theme or tale that resonates. What about you, Letcia? Do you have a favorite tale or type of tale?
Probably those stories where a human is conflicted because they shapeshift from animal to human form, and they have difficulty navigating both worlds, especially when there's love involved. Those are like, Beauty and the Beast, things like that.
Yeah.
I've always liked those. Liked those stories.
And both of these things resonate, they're very different types of stories that you both mentioned, but there's something about these tales, and you see similar stories in different countries, or sometimes in cultures on the other side of the world. Yes. So it's interesting that folklore fulfills some type of very clear psychic need in us. We need these tales to guide us, or to comment upon our unhuman nature and perhaps inhuman nature as well, on the things beyond us. Are there ghost stories that you guys like? I'm doing this as a segue to get Jenn to tell us her latest spook story.
I don't know. Maybe Jenn should tell us her ghost story. She hasn't done much talking. Maybe we should let Jenn tell us about.
Yeah, I want to hear the ghost story.
Yeah.
Well, it's not really much of a ghost story, though. I work at a historical site here in Missouri, and Dean always likes to see if there's something new that's happened when I work, and sometimes it does. So I haven't been back at this location in a while because I'm a seasonal employee, so I just recently started back, and it took a while to get any type of, anything that I really noticed. And we happened to be up in the attic, and that's our archive area. And I happened to walk over to a certain area and felt a little dizzy. And there's this weird feeling that I get when I'm around something that's not quite in human form or normal. And it caught my attention. I thought, I'm finally feeling something. And I moved back a little bit, and it was completely gone. So that was significant. So I'm like, okay, so then that's definitely legit. So I went back, and then I felt it again. So that's what I told him the other day. This location, a lot of people think is haunted, but because matter of fact, today I had a tour, and that was like one of their first questions. And I let them know that it wasn't haunted, that it was made out of limestone, and explained the stone tape theory to them and told them that most of the things that happen in the location is footsteps, stuff like that. So I don't have anything really exciting with this particular location, but I guess it is fun to hear the different happenings. Yeah.
But it's active, I think, I suppose, that it's a location which is...
Well, yeah, I would say, yeah. I mean, sometimes you hear coughing, you can hear... I mean, you walk into that location and you don't feel alone. So to me, it's just like maybe the house itself has its own consciousness in a way, but I'm not sure. I mean, it's all made out of limestone, so we all know how that works with energies.
I know I've had that with a building here that I walked into, that this family, a famous founder of the town family lived in, and right away I was like, oh, I don't know, I think they've left their mark here. I think they're still around. It just felt so intense. It was like, I was just like, yeah, this is bizarre. And especially when you went into what would have been like his office or his room where they'd have their whiskey and their cigar. Mm-hmm. Boy, I was like, woo! It was intense.
Yeah, like little memory imprints.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And very fascinating. That's amazing that you get to work there, though. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's fun. I'm really connected to the location, so my tours are quite extensive because I want to make sure everybody understands it's not just a house.
Yeah,
and I want them to know about the person that built it and his life, and yeah, so I'm a little connected.
That's great. Well, and you would be like, after doing stuff, you get emotionally connected to the location. Mm-hmm. So you definitely pick up on stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Jen's sensitive as well. Like, we've been together at times and she's experienced or seen things and I haven't experienced or seen anything. I remember when you were here once, you said there was a figure in the room watching us while we slept.
Yeah, I woke up and it was right over me.
Which is great when I'm here by myself. I'm like, okay,
that's scare Dean. But I'm used to that kind of stuff. He's not, so
yeah,
that kind of spooks me a bit.
I had that one time in the house that my mother and my stepfather lived in. The lady before that they bought it from, she had passed away from cancer. And God, it probably been about 15, 20 years. But I had a friend over, they were doing like a Tupperware kind of candlelight party. My mom's like, please come and support us. So I bring my friend. And there was this horrible windstorm outside. It was just crazy West Coast hurricane level wind. And we're all sitting there at this thing. And all of a sudden my friend's eyes bulged open. And I was like, she's like, well, didn't you just see that? I'm like, see what? She's like, there was an old woman and she was standing in the doorway of your mom's bedroom and she just disappeared. And I'm like, oh, that's probably the old lady that passed away of cancer here. She's like, well, this is just nuts. Like, she's like, oh. I'm like, she's looking at me like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, I've never seen her. I said, I've heard a couple of things over the years, but I've never seen anybody. You're the first to ever say you saw something. But she was just like, she wanted to leave. And nobody has ever seen anything, but for whatever reason on that night, for her, she just she saw it, and that was it. And it's the only time it was.
She didn't want the candlelight party happening. That's why.
Yeah,
no candlelight parties.
We're probably going to need the candles after that storm. But yeah, it was. Nobody's ever seen her. They've had different experiences, but she saw her. And she described her, like she said, she just talked about it. And I said, oh, that's the old lady that used to own this house in the 70s and 80s. So it was interesting that some people tune into it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Are you one of those people, Letcia? I know that you've been involved in holistic arts and you've spent a lot of time studying esoterica. Are you sensitive to things like that?
Yeah, I am. But I don't get scared. Sometimes I just get annoyed and like I ask them, please leave me alone right now, please. Because I think sometimes spirits don't realize that they're kind of like stuck in like a dimension and they want to be in the room with you or things like that. But I don't ever get scared when I have that kind of like spirit intuition thing. And I've done ghost hunts here because San Diego, we've got it's not a very old city, but we've got a lot of haunted hotels that used to be brothels and card rooms. Yeah. And I did I think it was for the Discovery Channel. I was on the crew for a ghost hunt for the Wyatt Earp Hotel, because it's really super haunted. And the people that we were with had permission to lift up carpet and pull floorboards and all that from the owner of the building, because the building cannot hold tenants. Like, people will rent a small office suite where actually that was the brothel area, and then the bar is downstairs, and that's used to be the saloon, and it's always been like bar and restaurant rental, and then there's a basement. And yeah, it was interesting because they pulled up some corners of carpet and throughout the building, and we kept finding these marbles, not glass marbles, but marbles made out of agates. And then I'm on my phone looking up this thing, and the prostitutes would have these little tiny bags that they would carry, and they'd walk around the street, and they'd get a marble and they'd give it to a gentleman, and so the gentleman would go to the brothel and bring the marble to redeem, to see the girl that gave him the marble. So we found all these marbles, and it was kind of cool.
Oh, wow.
And then the people with the equipment, they were detecting some voice and energetic activity, and I was with another person that lifted up a floorboard and a piece of the cedar, the wall had like this veneer on it, and he pulled it up, and there was like children's toys and clothes that were like stuffed in the wall. And we also found like old money and coins and jewelry, and like a woman's like almost like a ballet slipper, a pink slipper. And it was really interesting. But yeah, that place is super haunted. I mean, no tenant stays in that place very long, and there's like a really super cold room and a warm room, and yeah, you feel like some strange energy in that building. And people, they put a mannequin in one of the windows because it's part of the ghost history of the brothel, as they said that people would drive by or walk by, and they would see the ghost of the prostitutes sitting in the window with their legs hanging out the window. And so somebody did that with a mannequin. But people swear that they don't even know about the story, that they think that they're drunk because they see women, hanging out their legs off the balconies of all the different little rooms. So, but I'm not fearful, but I do pick up some people are very, very sad. I can pick up their sadness, and a lot of ghosts are sad people, very sad people. And other than that, I don't, it doesn't scare me. I don't get scared easily. And I know that they do things to scare us because they want to be left alone. Like the spooking stuff, that's just because they want you out of their house, or they want you out of their space. And it's not intentionally to cause grief to anyone. It's just they're stuck in a place that they can't get out of, and it's kind of sad.
Yeah it is. Have you ever helped anybody try to cross over? I mean, has anybody ever tried to come to you and ask for help?
No, not yet. It could be possible though in the future. I do a lot of home hospice care, and I do work with some dying people, and that's always fascinating too, because I can always tell when it's the time it's going to happen, because they're kind of like this energy field just kind of like floats around up and around their bodies while they're like getting ready to pass. And so sometimes it like you think, oh, tonight's the night, and then the next day they're still here. But like you see the energetically, you can see like they're separating from the physical vessel. Yeah. And that's kind of interesting to experience and watch.
Yeah.
We just had one of our regular viewers / listeners, Mothman 46, talk about in the chat an experience he had in the woods where he felt something was following him, then rushed him, and he turned around and there was nothing there, which brought to mind one of my favorite, I suppose, modern mythologies or modern folklores, and that's David Paulides' Missing 411 books and other people. There's been this resurgence about the idea of, people going missing in national parks and in forests and woods. Do you guys have any take on that?
Well, it's actually funny because our friend Steve Stockton runs a missing 411 kind of people going missing channel, and we're going to eventually go on there and have him on our show. But there's a whole bunch of reasons. Like there's obviously sometimes it's people with dementia, but there's I thought a UFO folklore attached to that. There's a lot of mythical creatures even attached to that. I've never really looked into it, but I've just heard generally about it because of Steve's channel. And so I don't know what, maybe Letcia knows more. I haven't really delved into the missing people thing, but I hear it's actually quite vast.
Yeah, and national parks and national forests here. The Gabby Petito case.
Oh yeah.
When they were the true crime podcasters were investigating that, they found out there's been at least 20 missing people in that area where Gabby was found and where Brian was found too. And then there was that couple that was also murdered there. And yeah, they found all these cases of people going missing in that area. And it's curious because people feel like that investigation, Gabby's murder investigation, and then also the investigation of that couple, they're either did really sloppy work or there's some sort of cover up of what's going on in the area. So that's kind of scary because what is going on in that area?
Yeah, there was that one in Australia, that backpack killer. People were going missing in there, but they caught him. He was Ivan Milat or something.
Yeah, Ivan Milat. He's one of the people Wolf Creek is based on loosely.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
That was a creepy story. It was brutal. And of course, they're vulnerable people, right? They're coming from all over the world. They don't know. And it's the outback. It's some place that's very different from what they're used to. And they just go missing. And their family, it's hard for them to contact. And it's creepy. But I mean, it wasn't paranormal, but it was still.
Yeah, I'd almost rather a paranormal. I think experience.
People are creepy. People are worse.
Yes.
You're the people.
I mean, I think that's a good point too, though, is that some of these missing people very well could be victims of serial killers. But I think the clusters which have a longer historical run, like that somebody might have disappeared under similar experience and the similar circumstances in the 1920s and again in the 2000s, then you go, well, that's probably a further throw than, a serial killer.
There's a pattern.
Yeah, and the clusters, there's all these data points that Paulides points out, like, people, there's sometimes certain types of people that go missing. Like it seems sometimes people who are very above average or very below average go missing. Like there's a string of people that are, scientists or super intelligent genius types who go missing. And then of course, as you were saying, there are also people who might be, who might be mentally disabled who go missing. And there are data points, like often when the person goes missing, a weather event happens immediately afterwards, which prevents any search from finding them, like a crazy heavy storm. Often the bodies or the people are found, often the remains are found where searchers walked back and forth several times. You're on a trail, like, well, how's the body here when we've already walked it 10 times? So yeah, there's lots of there's those things which seem to suggest at least some of these disappearances, there might be something paranormal connected to it. And that always makes me think about some people, you're right, have the UFO connection, I think you were saying before.
Yes.
Melissa, but I also often think of the type of tales we were talking about when we were talking about the fair folk or the other crowd. There's lots of traditions of people being taken by the she because maybe the she took a fancy to them, they wanted a fairy lover, or maybe somebody did wrong by the fairies, or maybe somebody was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So there's a long cultural historical tradition, at least in the British Isles that I'm aware of people being taken by something which coexists with us but isn't us. So whenever I read or hear a podcast or anything in reference to those type of events, I always think of those older fairy traditions is what always comes to my mind.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and it seems to morph, like the fairies become like you don't, well, it depends where you live, because a lot of times in Ireland you will still hear fairy lore and people who swear they've seen a fairy. So I think it really depends where you live. It's not like fairies are gone. It's just, it might, UFOs might be a bigger thing in the US than it is in Ireland or something like that. Like in Italy, you're going to hear more of the sightings of the Virgin Mary than you are of UFOs, that kind of thing.
Very good point.
Yeah.
I was reading today a book by Mac Tonnies, who was Missouri-based. He's passed now, but this book came out posthumously. It's probably been out for almost 10 years anyway, called The Crypto-Terrestrials. And Mac Tonnies' position was that maybe these things aren't extraterrestrial that people have encounters with. Maybe they're something that lives among us or on this planet or elsewhere. And he made the point, which what you said then made me think of, is that sometimes people see these as extraterrestrials or Virgin Marys or whatever else, maybe because when we live in cultures that don't recognize the other, like perhaps we did if we lived in Ireland 200 years ago, where nobody would have knocked down a fairy fort, nobody would have gone out on All Hallows Eve or Beltane or any of these times where the fairies were out and traveling between their forts. But perhaps because now we live in a culture which doesn't really acknowledge these things are knocking at the door and pushing their way in even harder to get some kind of acknowledgement from us. And whether that's literally true or perhaps even metaphorically or psychologically true, maybe some of these apparitions that we have, and they're today, they look like extraterrestrials or flying saucers. I often wonder, even prior to reading Mac Tonnies' book, if maybe that isn't something knocking at our subconscious door, saying, you're ignoring us in your culture today. Here we are. We'll come to your bedroom and abduct you and, do some terrible genetic experiment on you because you're not paying attention to it.
Yeah. Well, and I've interviewed somebody, and I never ever put the interview up, and I never ever will. I deleted it a long time ago, but he was an amazing artist. He had these amazing paintings. He was very introverted. And eventually he said, yeah, I will come on your podcast. And I knew, I said, don't do a live stream, pre-record this one. And I pre-recorded it. And he was talking about his UFO abduction and how it influenced his artwork. And he talked about one when he was a child, and then midway about this one, he started to come up to talk about something, and he had a total PTSD, out flashback, went a little like loopy, and it went crazy right in front of me. And so I was just really calm. And I said, I think we should shut the interview down. I'm really sorry. I didn't realize this was going to trigger you or get you this way. And he said, neither did I. And I said, I promise you, this will never see the light of day. No one will ever know it was you. I'm going to delete it right away. And I just calmed him down, but it was real. Like whatever. I don't know if it was a UFO. I have no idea, but whatever it was a real trauma. And I know that for sure from that man's reaction. And it was such a intense, like, I never make fun of people when they say UFOs. I may not believe them all the time, but I usually don't. But because after experiencing that, whatever it was, he feels that that's very real. And you could tell by how he started reacting. It was actually traumatizing, and I deleted it, and no one will ever see it, and I'll never say his name. But it was crazy. Like, it was almost like right in front of me, he was starting to relive it. Yeah. It was intense. So I think some of this stuff is like, there's something there.
There's a book called The Terror That Comes in the Night by David Hufford, I think. It's an academic book. I think it came out in the 1980s. And it's about essentially the sleep paralysis experience in Newfoundland. And there they identified the thing sitting on their chest as I think the night hag or the old hag.
The old hag of the dribble, old hag. Yeah, I wanted to cover that on our show for sure because I'm Canadian, right? But yeah, the whole town was getting it.
Yeah, but the interesting thing which came out of that is that he found when he started to, I think he did a study with his students, and none of them were from Newfoundland, but a lot of them, a high percentage of them, had similar sleep paralysis experiences, but didn't identify it as the hag. That was the name of the hag was a culturally specific, perhaps, idea, but the experience was a universal or at least a wider ranging experience than just Newfoundland. And that's interesting because I know as somebody with a background and looking at this stuff academically, it is very easy to use a cultural brush, as I often have, to explain a lot of these things as, well, that's what you expect culturally, so that's what you get. You expect, if you think a spook light's a witch, that's what you're going to see. If you think a spook light's a UFO, that's what you're going to see. If you think it's got a night hag sitting in your chest, that's what you're going to see. If you think it's grey aliens, that's what you're going to see. But the interesting thing about this study, about Hufford's book, was that it suggested there's at least an experiential basis to this. So whatever the cultural trappings might be, there's a genuine experience. And so when you had the person on your podcast who'd had that harrowing experience and had that kind of PTSD flashback, they probably, I don't know whether they'd been abducted by extraterrestrials, but I don't doubt they'd had an experience. The question just becomes, what is the experience? Is it in us, or is there something exterior triggering it? What is behind a lot of these type of paranormal experiences?
And it's funny because we're talking about this, but a lot of these experiences influence folklore, it influences tales, it influences stories that we think are fictional too, but the basis of it is some real experience. Yeah.
We had somebody comment before about how they'd been raised by their grandfather on Irish stories, and a big part of that was the myth of the Changeling. And it's interesting. But of course, everybody probably knows what the Changeling is, so I'll sum it up in about 10 seconds. It's the idea that the fairies either take a child or sometimes even your wife or husband and replace them with one of their own kind. And you have a fairy living amongst you who all of a sudden becomes nastier. If it's a baby, it cries more or whatever. But a lot of that has to do with the idea that somehow there's some type of genetic back and forth. Like they'll take our baby or deliver their baby. And
your mic's cut out.
Yeah, like you sound like you're underwater. I don't know what happened.
Oh, I do?
Now it's fine.
Oh, okay. Well,
maybe they don't want you talking.
They don't.
It's the fairies. You're right.
The fairies are doing it.
What I love, my daughter already knows, like because she's heard me talk about it. Can you hear me now, or have I gone again?
Yeah,
you sound great.
Okay. My daughter.
You sounded like somebody had their hand over your mouth.
Fairies.
Quiet.
May have been the fair folk, but she knows not to say fairy. She's just heard me reference it a couple of times. She says, "Oh, I mean the fair folk. Oh, I mean the other crowd." Yeah. And I'm like, "You've already learnt. I'm so proud." Don't say fairy, say fair folk, other crowd. Yeah. But I take it somewhat seriously, not because I necessarily think there really are these other real entities, although they might be, but there's something, I don't know, precious, or there's something significant about the idea that there's another species that coexists with us. And so to dismiss it as like, oh, the fairies, it seems like the Irish and other cultures were onto something when they said, we refer to them in ways that they won't take offense by. We'll call them the fair folk. We'll call them the gentry. We'll call them the other crowd. We're not going to, say anything bad about them, because they, there might be ramifications if you talk badly about them. But what I was saying quickly before my mic went was that the Changeling mythology about a baby being replaced by a fairy baby and the fairies taking your baby has real commonalities with a lot of, not a direct parallel, but you can see the same type of genetic or erotic or sexual underpinnings of the abduction phenomenon when aliens are meant to be doing some genetic hybridization, with us. So there's a commonality in that. And I'm far from the first person who pointed that out. Lots of academics and other people have pointed out the commonality between fairy faith, and including fairies wanting to take us as lovers, as extraterrestrials now, take us and supposedly do other things to us. So there is, perhaps the alien abduction mythology is the latest version of, or the technological version of fair folk.
Yeah, definitely.
What's your thoughts, Letcia? I know you have a lot of insight into these kind of things.
Well, yeah. It seems like this new generation of neuroscience researchers that have a background in quantum theory are showing us that we have a neural network on the planet with everything that's alive and even some inanimate objects. And I think we do get encounters, but on a level we don't understand. It's like, I think, like, people believe in the holographic universe and whatnot.
Mhm.
I think because we know this dimension here, I think we do have encounters, and they can be real, and they probably play themselves out in our minds or in our sleep. But I think science is going to prove that that's a possibility, because they're doing lots of research on that subject and other dimensions, and giving it that academic, sciencey proof, and lots of published papers. I'm finding on academia and other locations that have academic papers published, lots of occult and paranormal material that these younger students that are getting their doctorate are publishing. And it's amazing, and it's really quite cool, actually.
It's funny to think sometimes that, well, I often think science is well behind the 8 ball when it comes to some of these things. I think it has problems with looking at things outside of its paradigm, as philosophers of science like Thomas Kuhn, and even the great Charles Fort, 50 years before Kuhn, was suggesting similar things. But talking about modern folklore, like alien abduction, I guess you could consider modern folklore. What's some of the modern folklore you guys are interested in looking at it? Folklore Dark, are there things that are on your radar? Like, we've got to look at that, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of new, like, you can look at things like Slender Man or things that are born on the internet. And you can trace them. I mean, even Chupacabra, it's probably easier to trace their origins or where they came from. They may not have that historical, magical feel to them, but they're there, and how they believe in them. But I'm guessing a lot of modern stuff, it's going to be online. It might even be in the form of a meme, like it's going to be different.
Well, there's a lot of that modern dark folkloric stuff coming out of Japan and South Korea. They got some really creepy writers and dark comic books, graphic novels, movies. Netflix has a lot of the crazy Japanese and South Korean stuff that I really like.
Yeah. And it's kind of being the thing too that's interesting about modern folklores is we're not sitting around a campfire. Like, we're sitting here, like, with you, Dean and Jenn. We're on technology. We're doing it through technology. It's not quite the same at all, I would say, as sitting with somebody around a campfire and telling stories. There's something missing, but it's certainly, I mean, it allows you to talk to people from places that you would never have been able to. So it's different. There's a different dynamic to modern stuff, because we can reach across the world and have someone from Japan or someone from the Slavic come and join us and share different stuff. So I think it's like, I don't know, it's taking on, it morphs very differently. It's you're not just sitting with the people in your local village sharing a story, you're connecting with the whole world. So that's going to be an interesting thing to explore about modern folklore.
Like a digital story circle.
Yeah.
Kind of.
I mean, you could call it a digital campfire, but I think it's just, it's like, it's not, the information's not moving in your village. It's moving, around the world. And I find that really fascinating, because I don't know, it just, I'm probably going to be more inclined to Irish and English as well, because that's the background I was raised as. But like I said, I have a whole other background I've never experienced, and maybe that'll enlighten us and will change. I don't know. I don't know where it's going to go because of this global thing. What's going to be, what's going to be the next global religion? Like, witchcraft is on the rise now, and that's being taken from the old. Like, things are changing and different, and the Gen Zs and the millennials are doing things really differently. So it's, and I know we're scared that the old is dying, and they don't have their stories. That's why this show is going to be important, because hopefully I'll bring some tales that I know from my family that I've recorded before they passed on, and Letcia will. But yeah, it's going to be, we'll reserve that, but it's going to be different, like, because we can, it's global.
Yeah, they talk about virality when it comes to, you want to go viral, but it's interesting that some of this modern folklore can go viral very quickly. Like, it might have taken in the past hundreds of years for a story to spread to another culture or to another country. But when you mention Slender Man, for example, look how that went so quickly from wherever it was on Creepypasta, I don't know, wherever it was initially, to, two schoolgirls trying to murder another schoolgirl because of the influence of the story. And Lon Strickler, who's a guest we've had on before, he's somebody you should get him on, because he just did that. I forget the title of the book, but it's about humanoid memes anyway. The idea that things created, I think, in the kind of the internet realm of being seen out there in the real world. He literally I think he just dropped the book. I saw a push for it on Phantoms of Monsters.
Look how fast memes spread of Chris Rock and Will Smith. It's modern folklore.
Like minutes.
I tried to avoid it, but I did throw out a couple because they were good. But yeah, it's like, I mean, like a long time ago, you would have folklore in your Greek mythology and your Greek gods, and now you have celebrity actors who are your, mythological figures, and we've got stories and myths about them. So maybe we'll have to do dark celebrities.
I admit I made two Will Smith, Chris Rock memes, linking them both to Vince McMahon pulling the strings with it. Like, I did one immediately when it happened, and then I did one a couple days later. So
I just shared one that was like, basically it does the we will rock you.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It was like, it showed a fist, Will Smith slapping him, fist, Will Smith slapping them, then a we, and Will Smith, a we and a Will Smith, and then Chris Rock and you. It was good. I was like, oh my God, they had to be Chris Rock and Will. They just had to fit into that meme perfectly.
Yeah. But that's a good point too, the idea that today, this is one part of modern culture. Well, I probably don't like lots of parts, but this is one part I particularly don't like, and that is the almost reification of celebrities. You know what I mean? How you're right. Our interest in these people, like, to be honest, I don't really care if two rich people slap the heck out of each other at a stupid award ceremony. I mean, whatever. Is it real? Is it not real? I don't care. But it becomes so important culturally to us. It's interesting that we can latch onto those things and they'll be gone 2 weeks later or a month later when something else comes along. While a lot of the type of things I know you'll be talking about on the show and we've talked about tonight seem to have this longer resonance. Do you think those things with the longer resonance are disappearing as we get these immediate meme gratifications?
I think you're going to see, like, okay, let's take Star Wars, for instance. You had George Lucas, who pulled back and grabbed these archetypes that were from the old and learned how to tell it in a new tale. I think that's what you have to do, is learn how to bring it up to a modern standard to introduce people or a new generation to these archetypes. And it's a shame when movies become all about political wokeness and stuff, because they miss that archetypical storyline that George Lucas introduced us to with Star Wars. And I think that's kind of what you have to do is make it modern. But there's different elements like these. There's a reason these stories like King Arthur, there's a reason they stick with it. They're mythical. They speak to multiple different cultures. Like people from all over can understand them and they can place themselves in with these archetypes. It's not some niche, weird, strange thing. Like, it just speaks mythically. Whereas then you have your local folklores that speak on a smaller level and legends. And then you've got your traditional stuff you can explore. You can explore things about how, that processes or habits or traditions that people have or clothing that they wear. There's all different types of folklore that you can look at.
That is true. That is true. It's very interesting when you mentioned perhaps there's the Star Wars movies would have been an example. Well, you're right. Lucas
Mhm.
went to those Joseph Campbell Jungian type
Mhm.
ideas when he did the initial trilogy, but the later movies seem to be fulfilling diversity rosters and ticking the
Yeah.
boxes of what they're. You can imagine them having a meeting saying, "Well, we've got to include this and this and
Yeah.
this and this," and do you think that type of wokeness or that type of political correctness is something which destroys the ability for a new myth or a new folklore to rise that can be resonant and have
Yeah.
have a longer lasting effect?
Yeah, certainly it does because it misses the point of the story in the first place, and it takes everything so literally, like as if Darth Vader is a male and he's coming to get you, or this is a male and he's coming to get you. You don't have to make it woke because they're archetypes, and you can see all archetypes inside yourself, whether you're female or male. You don't have to project it literally out into the figure.
Mm-mm.
You don't have to do that. It just happens to be that there's male and female characters, and that's fine, and you can identify with those. You don't have to go woke and check off boxes. They're there for a reason, they stick for a reason, and people gravitate to them for a reason. And when they add all this politics and agendas and put things like the Force is female and ridiculous stuff like that, it's like they accuse people of gendering things, and then they write the Force is female. It's like, okay, they're just it misses the whole point in that you're to see yourself in these archetypes and learn a lesson from the story for yourself on your development.
That's a great point. I think maybe
Mhm.
Jungian psychology is a cure for wokeness.
Maybe.
No, I'm serious. That return to
Yeah.
the psychological
Yeah.
understanding of the
Yeah.
archetype.
Yeah,
We need
absolutely.
more of that in storytelling. That's for sure. I just saw Gillian Anderson. I saw a story, and I'm a big fan of the X-Files. I mean, it had a big impact on me. It came out shortly after I got reinterested in the UFO phenomenon, and Gillian Anderson came out today and said she won't do another show unless they get a whole range of new writers who are writing essentially more woke material. Like, she doesn't want to do the X-Files. She said, I know people say Scully was feminist, but she wasn't feminist enough, and yada yada yada. And I'm like, my goodness, does the X-Files have to be reimagined now as well? It wasn't woke enough. Good grief.
Yeah, she's just sniffing the wokeness, and
Yeah.
I think they believe what they say. I don't think they think they're wrong. I think they honestly believe it, and they don't really understand. If that's what she's saying, she doesn't understand why her own original TV show was successful. She's missed the whole point, and she's just about politics now. She's not about creativity. It's right over her head. That's my opinion.
Yeah, that's too bad. Because I don't think I would watch that. I thought, what's his name? Mark Frost? Was he the writer? I
He
thought
was the
did a
one who
good
did
job.
the music. Mark Frost was the music. Chris Carter was the guy who
Oh
developed
yeah,
the
Chris
show.
Carter. Chris Carter.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
thought
no,
he did a good job.
And when you go woke, and you have all these females, like all men are evil, all females are good, that is not the reality of the world. That is not the reality. But you should show good and bad in all characters and their struggle to, be good, or that they lose that struggle and they go bad. It doesn't matter whether a male or female or what they're, or if they're they think they're a unicorn. It should just be the struggle of that within themselves.
Yeah, and
You
I
know.
think it's a real problem, both as we're talking about on an archetypal or a psychological level, but it's a problem on a creativity level as well. That if you have an idea that doesn't encompass those ideas, then you're not going to get produced, or
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to ever tell your story anymore in a system which is there's an actual almost a guidebook on how many of these things you have to tick in your story. So you can't do what we've done as a species from time immemorial, let these stories evolve and they become organic and they're told the way that feels right. That now they have to be told, so they're fulfilling a diversity roster or a woke agenda. I don't understand how anyone can tell a story with that
And
kind of
It doesn't allow the story to evolve organically. It doesn't allow the people, to choose the stories that work best for them and acclimatize. It controls it, and then it shames them when they don't want to participate or talk about it. It's not real folklore. I mean, folklore is supposed to be about the people, not about some producer who wants to tick some boxes.
God, you know what? That's such a fantastic point. The idea that you're right. Folklore it belongs to the people, and today our culture doesn't belong to the people anymore. It is decided in an algorithm. In an algorithm or in a back office where people are going, okay, we need to tick these boxes. Good grief.
It's not how folklore gets created, that's for sure.
Well, I'm so glad you guys are doing Folklore Dark, because you obviously have a fantastic handle on this type of storytelling and what's important to us and what needs to be remembered. And somebody out there needs to be doing what you're doing, talking about folklore, collecting stories, telling stories, seeing what's resonating in our subconscious and what isn't. So how can people who want to watch your show, which it's coming out soonish, I know, but how do they get a hold of you? Where do they go?
So I've been working 7 days a week, so I apologize. It would have been out. Well, I'm sure if me and Letcia weren't so busy, it would be out way before. But we're probably going to start doing some recordings mid-April. So there is a Facebook group, Folklore Dark, and I have my YouTube channel that I've always had. It's there. It is called Folklore Dark. The website's going to be up. I'm almost finished it, and it will be folkloredark.com. But if you go to that URL, you're going to see this old website that I was working on, not the new one. So you can go there, but it won't be the show. The best thing to do is go to the Facebook page, Folklore Dark, and that's where I'll always announce things and put links. But the YouTube channel is pretty important too.
Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Letcia. It was an absolute joy having you both on.
Thank you.
I'd love to have you both on again. You guys, there's the wonderful thing about talking to other podcasters is that it's very organic, the chat. It just flows nicely.
This was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me on and us on. It was great. And I just, hopefully it's successful. Like I said, I read you guys that little bit of a poem, and I'm going to put it to music, and I'll get a little preview out on the YouTube channel as fast as I can, just like a little clippy thing, just a teaser. But we've got to, reality strikes. 7, you have to work and pay the bills. So we'll go as fast as we can.
Oh, I know. I know the truth. Well, until we talk to you guys again, Melissa, Letcia, thank you, and keep it weird.
Thank you, Jen and Dean. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you for joining us tonight. If you're interested in checking out more episodes, you can find us at talkingweird.com. If you haven't already, please like the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talking Weird Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to Talking Weird. We're available on most podcast platforms and YouTube. And if